Hey guys, this is David, and today we're going to learn how to set up internationalization in a Next.js 15 app using the very popular Next International library. Next International is one of the most popular fully featured Next.js internationalization libraries, built specifically for modern Next.js apps. So in this video, we are going to learn how to set up Next International, and we're also going to learn how to set up i18n Nexus to manage and automatically AI translate all of our translations for us. So let's get started. So as you can see here, I've already gone ahead and set up a very simple Next.js 15 app. It has three very simple pages, a home page, an about page, and a contact page. So let's go to our code and make this site multilingual. So the first thing we're obviously going to want to do is install Next International. So let's go to our console and type in npm install next-intl. To quickly show you our package JSON, we are using Next International version 4.3.4, which is the latest version as of today. And before we get started with the code, I want to mention that you could follow along with this video using the blog post we have. It's basically the same exact tutorial. I'll post the link in the description, and you could find any code snippets that we go through here and simply copy them to your project. Alright, so the first thing we need to set up with Next International is internationalized routing. So that basically just means putting the locale in the path name, like /en for English, /de for German. So this was actually a built-in feature in the pages router in earlier versions of Next, but with the app router, we have to add it in ourselves or use a library like Next International to do it for us. So in our app folder here, I'm going to create a new folder with the name locale in brackets. And if you've used Next.js before, you know that these brackets in a directory name means that we are creating a dynamic segment in our path name. So since we want our locale to appear at the beginning of our path name, we are going to nest all of our pages and content in this directory. So I'm going to take all of the files in our app folder, except the favicon, leave that at the inside the app folder still. Take all our pages and move it inside of locale. And with that done, we are now going to update our next.config.ts. And in here we are going to integrate the Next International plugin. So I'm going to import create Next International plugin, and then down here I will assign it to a variable called with Next International and call it here. And then we're simply going to call this with our config as an argument. And with that set up, we need to create a few Next International configuration files. And we're going to put these configuration files in a directory at the root of our project called i18n. And I want to mention, if you're using the src folder, when you created your Next app, you want to put this in your src folder. So the first configuration file we're going to add here is going to be called routing.ts. And this file is just going to contain a couple lines telling Next International what languages we want our app to support. So I'm going to import at the top here, import define routing from Next International /routing. And down here we are going to export a variable called routing and call define routing, and we're going to pass in an object that's going to contain three properties. So the first property in here is locales, which is an array of all of the language codes for the languages we want our app to support. So in my app, I'm going to support English, we'll do German, and Italian. The second property we're going to add is default locale, and just like it sounds, this is the default or fallback language for our app. So I'm going to set this to English. And the final property we're going to add here is locale prefix, and I'm going to set this to as needed. So this is just a preference. Basically all it says is if we go to the English path names, it's not going to include the en at the beginning of the path name, but it will do that for German and Italian. If you want all of your languages, including your default locale, to appear at the beginning of the path name, then you can just exclude this because that's the default behavior. So I prefer it like this, so we will save it like that. And the next file we're going to add in here is our navigation.ts configuration file. And this is where we're going to export Next International's navigation APIs. So for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this in here. Like I said, you could go to the link in the description and find all our code snippets so that you could copy and paste it in as well. And basically all that's happening here is we are exporting Next International friendly versions of all these standard Next.js navigation functions. And we'll see how we're going to be using these when we get to editing our components. Alright, so on the topic of navigation, one thing we need to do is instantiate Next International's middleware. So at the root of your project, create a new file called middleware.ts, and this is at the root of your project, not in the i18n folder. And again, if you're using the source directory, make sure this middleware is in the source directory. And again, I'm going to go to that link in the description and copy over all the code that's going to end up in here. Oops, I missed a bracket. And if you're not familiar with the middleware TS file, this actually isn't a Next International specific feature. This is actually a feature of Next.js. It basically allows us to run code on the server before a request is completed. So we're going to be using Next International's middleware here to intercept requests and direct them to the correct internationalized route. And this config down here is another Next.js feature where we can define which requests to actually run through this middleware. So in our case, we really only want to handle the requests to our pages. We don't want requests to our API, for example, or internal Next.js requests. So this file is good to go. So with our routing set up, the next thing we need to do is open our route layout. And what we need to do in here is render a 404 page if someone tries to go to a path name with a locale that we do not support. Because at the moment, Next.js will just accept any text at the beginning of the path name. So we want to make sure it's a locale we support so we don't run into any errors. So what I'm going to do is read the locale from our params. So I'm going to read the params here, put the typing here. And we are going to destructure out the locale from params here. So this is the same word as inside of the brackets here. And to check if this is a locale we support, we are going to use the has locale helper function from Next International. And we will write this condition here. So if has locale. And here we're going to pass in our locales that we support. So we'll import that from our routing, from our i18n routing file that contains all of our locales. And the second argument here is the locale from params. And if this condition is met, simply call not found from next navigation. So this will render a 404 if someone puts a random locale we don't support at the beginning of the path name. And one final thing we need to do in here is import the Next International client provider component to wrap all of the content on our page. So we'll simply put my navbar and children all inside, nested in this Next International client provider. This component is necessary in order for all client components in our app to have access to our translations. Alright, so we just have one final configuration file that we need to add. I know it's a lot of configuration, a lot of different files and updates that we're making, but none of this stuff ever has to be touched again. Once we get it all set up, using Next International will be smooth sailing from here on out. So we're going to add one more file to our i18n folder here, and this one is going to be called request.ts. And once again, to speed this up, I'm just going to copy from that link in the description and paste this snippet in here. And this get request config is how Next International is going to load our translations from JSON to provide them to our components, more specifically our server components. So as you can see here, it is currently importing them from a messages directory in our app, and we're going to have JSON files for each locale we support. So it'll take the current locale from the request and load the proper JSON file. So as I said earlier in the video, we're going to be using AI to automatically generate these files. We're going to be using i18 Nexus to do that. It's also going to manage our strings for us and just make the overall workflow much more manageable and automatic. So let's go ahead and get started with the fun part here. So if you don't have an i18 Nexus account, you can go to i18nexus.com and set up a free account. I've gone ahead and just started by creating a new project so you can see the workflow. Name your project. Let's call mine Next.js 15 project. And then select which library we're using. So we're going to be using Next International, of course. And that looks good. And then we see here we have our base language tile. So this is going to be whatever you added as your default locale in our Next.js config. And then add all the languages that you want to support. So we are supporting German. And you can choose which machine translations you want to use. I like to use OpenAI for AI translations. And we're also going to do Italian. And we'll do OpenAI here as well. Now let's open our project and start adding some of our strings from our app. So back in our code, we will go to our page component. We'll start with our home page first. I'm going to take this welcome to demo header and add a new string, set it as the value, and then we want to set a key for referencing this value in our code. And I'll call this home.header. In Next.js, it's common to namespace all of your keys, separated with a period, just to help with organization, and also helps us with more efficient loading of our translations on our page. We also have this team notes field here. If you're working with a team, you can add any notes about this string. It's totally optional. And we're going to go ahead and save that. And now we can see if we expand here, our value is automatically translated with OpenAI. Now let's see how we render this key with Next International. So in my homepage component, I'm going to import use translations from Next International, and then we are going to define a function called t, and then call this hook here. And then as an argument, it's going to take the namespace of the keys that you're going to be using on this page. So for all of the keys on this page, I'm going to put them in a home namespace. And all that means is all the keys that are prefixed with home dot. So that way Next International doesn't load every translation for your app just to view this page. And then we're going to replace this text here with T, and then pass in the key. So ours is just header. And now I'm sure you're wondering, how do we get all of our translations from i18 Nexus? To do that, we're going to use the i18 Nexus CLI. So all we need to do is npm install i18 Nexus -CLI, and we'll do -G to install that globally. And to use the CLI, we're going to need our API key, our project API key. So go to your project settings and copy the API key here, and then set it in a environment variable in a .env file, just like this, i18 Nexus API key. And now in our console, we can call i18 Nexus pull. And as you can see, that created a messages directory for us, just as Next International expects, with all of our languages as JSON files. So you can see all of our translations here. And let's go check out our app. So as we can see, we have the welcome to the demo text here. And if I change the page to, let's say, DE, boom, we have our automatic AI translation from i18 Nexus. And the next step is going to be adding the rest of the text on this page to i18 Nexus for automatic translation. So every time we add a new string to i18 Nexus, we have to run the i18 Nexus pull command to get the latest version of our translations. But in development, we don't have to do that because we can actually run a different command called i18 Nexus listen, which will allow our local environment to listen to changes in our i18 Nexus project and pull them automatically. This makes this whole workflow much more convenient. So I'm going to go ahead and open my terminal here. And in here, I'm going to open a new tab and run i18 Nexus listen. And when we run that, we can see it downloads our latest translations and is now listening for i18 Nexus updates. So let's go ahead and add this string to our project. And we'll create a new string with this as the value. And for the key, as you can see, we get an autocomplete with our existing namespaces. So this will be home, and we'll call this subheader. Save that, take a look at our translations, and there they are. So now when we move back to i18 Nexus, since we're now listening with the i18 Nexus listen, we can look at our messages, and we can see we have the subheader here automatically with all the translations. And now we'll just replace this text with T subheader. Let's check it out in our app, and we can see here our subheader is now translated. One thing to note, a little quirk about Next International, is if you want your translations in your messages folder to be hot reloaded without having to refresh the page, you do have to use the turbo argument on next-dev. But if you don't want to use TurboPack, not a big deal. You'll just have to refresh the page anytime you make changes to your messages JSON. Now we need to add these final two pieces of text, and instead of jumping back and forth between the i18 Nexus dashboard and the browser, there's actually an i18 Nexus extension that will load your project up based on the API key, and we could just enter the key and value here just as we would in the platform. So for example, we'll add this Learn About Us link, so I'll just type home, get the autocomplete, home.learn link. And the value is Learn About Us, and submit. And if we go to our messages, we'll see that the new key has now been added, and it's automatically translated and automatically downloaded right to our project. And we can even see in our project in i18 Nexus, we now have this home learn link with all the translations here automatically. So it just gets thrown right into this dashboard here. And the benefit of having a dashboard like this is that you can have non-technical members of your team come in here and just change text on the fly and have it auto-translated. You can also invite translator users to come in and be invited to the project as a translator. and they will see this translator view where they can just go through and edit and confirm the translations. So there's no more emailing JSON files to translators and having them email them to you back and hoping the structure is all still correct. They just come to this dashboard and edit and confirm them here. So a very convenient and scalable workflow here. All right, and finally, let's add that final link. Contact us. And we'll say home.contact link. Submit. And let's replace this text really fast. So this was learn link and contact link. And if we go to our page to check it out, there we go. Our links are all translated. Let's check it out in Italian. Boom, just like that. And one really cool thing about AI translations compared to something like Google Translate or DeepL is that you can actually type in AI notes. So these are notes to the AI translator about the value, if there's any context needed, or if the value is a vague term. Like if you have a banner on your pricing page that says save, Google Translate might translate save as save on a button to save a file, but to save money is often a different type of save translation. So you could type in the AI note, this appears on my pricing page, and it'll give you the correct translation. This field is also in the user interface here. If you notice on every value field in the strings management page here, there's an AI note that you can add and mention anything about this value as far as the tone or the number of words you'd like to keep it to, where it appears in your app. So that's really awesome. You can also add in your project settings global notes about your company or industry, so it has even more context about how to translate your project. So we have all our strings automatically translated and managed in i18 Nexus. One thing a lot of teams like to do is just completely ignore the messages folder, and then in package.json, just have the i18 Nexus strings pull before the build. You'll probably also want to add it here as well before start. And with the npm run dev command, you can use a library like concurrently to concurrently run your dev server and run i18 Nexus listen at the same time. So that'll look something like this. And you can find this setup to copy and paste in that link in the description. In this case, you would have to install concurrently as a dev dependency, and you'll also want to install the i18 Nexus CLI as a dev dependency, just so that the CLI is available in every environment that you're running this. So let's do that real fast. I'm going to npm install the i18 Nexus CLI and concurrently with the save dev flag. And now they're both here. And now these commands will work in any environment. So let's restart up our dev server now that we have this new dev command, npm run dev. And we can see it is running i18 Nexus listen along with our dev server. So we don't need to have two tabs open anymore. Awesome. Something else that we need to do to make sure that Next International works correctly is we need to replace all the links in our app with the link component exported from our navigation TS file. So instead of importing this from next link, we want to import it from next navigation, or sorry, i18n navigation. We're going to do one more thing to make sure that Next International works well with static rendering. And I highly recommend doing this. So in your layout.tsx, we're going to use generate static params to make sure that the routes can be rendered at build time. So to do that, you're going to export a function generate static params. This is just part of Next.js. And this is just going to return all of our locales. Another thing we want to do is right here, call set request locale. Pass in the locale. And what this basically does is allows us to pass the locale to all our server components, because otherwise we'd have to prop drill the locale prop into every server component. So to avoid that, we can set this request locale in the layout. And this will also be required on every top level page. So for example, in our home page, I would call it right here. Make sure to import that properly. And we can get the locale by destructuring it from params. We'll use the use hook, params, and then pull the params from here. So this basically allows the locale to be accessible to all server component descendants in this page. All right, and for one last thing, and I truly mean this will be the last thing, a lot of apps require a drop-down for the user to select the language that they want to view the page in. So Next International automatically picks the language for the user based off the accept language header. But we can also let the user select their language with a cookie. So let's quickly see how to do that. So in my components directory, I'm going to create a new file. I'll call it locale switcher.tsx. And I'm just going to copy this component from the link in the description. And you can see here we have a select element that on change switches the locale, and this replaces the language in the path name with the new language. And Next International on the back end is also setting a cookie with this new language, making it the user's preferred language. Now let's go ahead and throw this in our navbar component. And there's a couple changes we need to do in here for Next International, but the first thing, I will throw the locale switcher here. And of course, a few other things we want to do here. We want to make sure to import use path name and our link component from our Next International navigation file. So I'm going to delete these and import link use path name from i18n navigation. All right. Now I'm going to quickly add these pieces of text to i18 Nexus. We'll call this navbar.home, the value of home. Submit. Call this navbar about, the value of about, and navbar dot contact. And because there's different types of meanings of the word contact, I'm going to tell the AI this is the title of my contact web page. And then up here we'll use the use translations hook from Next International, and this will be navbar namespace t home. Oops, I keep doing that. And then we'll have t about, and lastly t contact. And let's check out our app. Boom, there we go. Everything translated in Italian. I actually looked this up. In Italian, they actually do just use the word home for a home page. I kept thinking, why isn't this one working? But it actually is working. And we have our little drop down over here. Doesn't look very nice, but it works. There we are in German, and there we are in English. And we can see our English route doesn't actually have the /en, because if you remember, we set the locale prefix to as needed. And there you have it. Yeah, I know we didn't get to translating the about or contact page, but you get the idea. It's the same thing as what we did for the home component here. One thing I also want to show in i18 Nexus is that if you prefer to view this nested like you would in a JSON file, you can change the view mode to nested list, and you have it just like that. All of your keys will appear in nested folders. All right, so I know there was a lot there. There's definitely a lot of configuration to set up, but as you can see, once all the configuration's all set up for both Next International and i18 Nexus, everything is really smooth sailing. You never have to touch any of that configuration stuff again. I mean, you could see in the end there how quickly we translated that navbar component. So as always, you can go to the link in the description, get all the code snippets, a full text version of this tutorial, in case we're going a little fast here, and feel free to reach out to us anytime, leave any comments with any questions or feedback, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Have a good one, guys.